Assalamualaikum everyone, good morning. My name is MUHAMAD BAZLI and today I will be presenting our article review together with my three group members, which is Muhammad SYAM, HASZRIQUEL and TUAN AMIRUL ALIF. Okay, our presentation focus on the social linguistic analysis of politeness strategies in directive speech ads. We chose this article referring from our subject, which is HSL 1083 from chapter 7. Okay, specifically, we reviewed two journal articles that examine how requests, refusal, and other directives are shaped by cultural background and social hierarchy. The first one article compares English and Mandarin speakers from a cross-cultural perspective, while the second article analyzes directive speech ads in Lauji language within a specific speech community. Through this review, we aim to explore how language reflects social culture and why understanding politeness strategies is important in communication. Okay, so now I am going to move the discussion to the next presenter.
Okay, so I'll talk about our introduction of our article research. So this research compares language use across age, gender and culture in social communication. The data for this research was collected from two social media platforms, which are Weibo and Facebook, and the respondents include both younger and older generations. First, based on these two articles, both males and females have their own linguistic patterns. Female respondents on both platforms tend to use more communal and relational language. Their language is usually more expressive and emotional, which reflects a communication style that emphasizes empathy and relationships. For example, females often use words that express feelings and personal experience. On the other hand, males tend to use more assertive and direct communication style compared to females. Their language reflects independence and focuses more on sharing information rather than expressing emotions. This shows that gender plays an important role in influencing linguistic patterns. Besides gender, age also affects language use, but in a different way. Age influences linguistic patterns through what is known as socio-emotional selectivity theory, which explains that people's priorities change as they grow older. This research shows that younger adults tend to use more positive emotional language. However, this decreases during middle adulthood because people in this stage often focus more on personal responsibilities and goals. In contrast, older adults tend to use more words related to social connections and family. This shows that as people grow older, their communication becomes more focused on meaningful relationships rather than personal achievements. Finally, culture also influences linguistic patterns. Cultural context affects how people express themselves because different cultures have different social values and communication style. For example, users on the Chinese platform Weibo, which represents a collectivistic culture, often focus on group harmony and community values. Their emotional expressions are usually more moderate and socially appropriate. In contrast, American users on Facebook tend to emphasize individualism and personal expression. They often express stronger emotions such as excitement or dissatisfaction in a more direct way. In conclusion, the findings from these two articles show that language use is influenced by gender, age, and culture. Gender affects whether communication is more emotional or more direct. Age influences language according to people's changing priorities. And lastly, culture shapes how people express their thoughts and feelings.
Right, so now I'm going to talk about the article summary. Alright, so for the first article, it is by Pan and colleagues in 2025. So the study looks at how gender and age influence language use on social media across different cultures. Okay, so the researchers focus on users from Weibo and Facebook. So they wanted to see whether males and females, as well as younger and older users, use language differently. Okay, so they used two main methods to analyze the data. So the first method is LIWC, or we call it as language inquiry and word count, which studies word categories and differential language analysis, which looks at the patterns in word use. And then the data were collected from public posts, so their users came from different age groups and backgrounds. Okay, and then the finding show that age and gender both affect language use. So the younger users usually use more casual and expressive language, while older users use more formal and structured language. And then in terms of gender, women tend to use more emotional and interpersonal language, while men use more analytical and object-focused words. However, the study also shows that culture plays an important role. So, language use on social media is shaped by gender, age, and also cultural background. Right, now for the second article, which is by Aiden. So, the study examined gender differences in social media language, especially in terms of how people communicate their emotions, politeness, and intentions. Alright, so this research focuses on pragmatic features, not just vocabulary. So it is based on social linguistic and digital pragmatics, which explain that online communication is shaped by social norms and context. So the study used a mixed methods approach, combining quantitative and qualitative analysis. And then the data were collected from Twitter, Reddit, and WhatsApp, which represent different types of communication environments. And then the findings show that gender differences exist, but they depend on the platform and situation. So female users tend to use more polite and indirect language, including emojis, especially on WhatsApp. And then male users tend to use more direct and task-focused language, especially on Twitter and Reddit. So overall, the study concludes that gender differences in online communication are influenced by social norms, platform features, and the purpose of the conversation. Alright, I think that's all from me. I'm going to pass it to another presenter. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum everyone. Today I would like to talk about the discussion of the article, which is focused on how language is influenced by social factors such as gender, age, and technology. Based on two articles. First, I will talk about the key findings and their significance. Both articles show that language is strongly shaped by social factors. In the first article, examining gender differences in social language, the findings show that men and women use language differently on social media platforms. For example, women tend to use more polite language, hedging, apologize, and emojis, while men usually use more direct and assertive language. This is important because it shows that social media does not remove gender differences in language. Instead, it becomes a new space where these differences is continue to exist. Okay, for the next one is I will discuss the strength and weakness of each article. The strength of the first article is that it uses real data from different social media platforms such as WhatsApp, Twitter, Facebook, and Reddit. This makes the finding more reliable and relevant to current communication practice. However, there's one weakness is that the study mainly focuses on male and female users and does not include other gender identities. For the second article, its the main strength is the experimental design, which compares young and older adults in both human and AI communication. This makes the study useful for understanding modern language use involving technologies. However, a limitation is that it focuses mainly on controlled speech tasks, which may not fully reflect on natural everyday conversation and everyday activity. Moving on to the similarities and differences between two articles. Both articles are similar because they examine how social factors influence the language use. They show that language is flexible and change depending on context and who we are communicating with. However, they have different in focus. The first article focus on gender differences in online text-based communication, while the second article focus on age and gender differences in spoken language. While the articles are related, but the study is different based on the communication setting. Now, I will explain how the articles support or challenge each other. The two articles support each other by showing that language is used shaped by social identity and context, while the first article explains how gender affect digital communication. The second article extend this by showing that age and gender also influence speech alignment, even when interacting with artificial intelligence. At the same time, the second article challenge The first by showing that gender alone is enough to explain language behavior. Age and familiarity with technology also play important roles. Finally, I will discuss the suggestion for future research. This to help the future research to be grown into more complex. So it shows that researcher could also explore how non-binary and gender diverse individuals use language online. In addition, more study could investigate how people communicate with artificial intelligence, such as virtual assistant and chatbots, to see whether language change when interacting with machine compared to human. Future study could examine gender and age together in social media.
Okay, so for the conclusion of this review, I would like to highlight that language should not be understood only as a grammatical system, but as a social practice that reflects cultural values, hierarchy, and relationship between speakers. So from the two articles discussed, it is clear that directive speech acts such as requests, refusal, and apologies are deeply influenced by the social cultural norms. The first article demonstrates that English and Mandarin speakers employ different politeness strategies due to their cultural background. English speakers generally prefer more directive expressions, although they still use mitigating devices such as modal verbs to maintain politeness. In contrast, Mandarin speakers tend to use greater indirectness and face-saving strategies, especially when addressing someone of higher status. Similarly, the second article shows that in the Lauji language, directive speech acts are closely connected to hierarchy, particularly age and authority. Speakers adjust their level of directness depending on whom they are addressing. This indicates that politeness is not universal, but socially constructed and shaped by the contextual factors such as power and distance. Overall, these findings highlight the importance of pragmatic competence in communication. Misunderstandings often occur not because grammatical errors, but because speakers follow different cultural expectations. Therefore, as usual, as future educators and language users, we must recognize that effective communication requires intercultural awareness in addition to linguistic accuracy. In conclusion, both studies reinforce the socio-linguistic principle that language reflect and produces social culture. In conclusion, both studies reinforce the socio-linguistic principle that language reflects and reproduces social culture. Understanding this relationship enable us to communicate more appropriately and build positive interaction across between cultural and hierarchical contexts. Okay, I think that is all from us. Thank you and Assalamualaikum.